Welcome everyone to today's webinar on value-added dairy processing presented by Cornell Cooperative Extension. This is an introductory webinar for anyone looking to learn more about on-farm dairy processing. My name is Margaret Quasdorf and I work with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Northwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops team as the dairy management specialist. I'll be your host today, and we are going to start by thanking our grant funding partner, Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. This webinar was brought to you with funding by them, and it's part of a bigger project for those interested in value-added dairy processing business ventures. We have an upcoming tour of value-added dairy processing businesses and dairy industry partners in New York State, as well as a discussion group and resources to help with risk management and deciding if value-added dairy processing is for you and your farm. Our speakers today are Caitlin Wally-Stoll, Farm Business Management Specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Southwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops team. And we are also happy to have with us today Anika Gianforti from Cornell Cal's Dairy Foods Extension Program. With that, I will let Caitlin take the floor.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, so as Margaret mentioned, I'm a farm business management specialist. So I cover topics that people aren't always super excited to talk about. So no one ever really gets into this because they love paperwork and love finances. But it's a foundation to any business decision, and it's really important, which is why we're going to highlight it right here at the beginning. So as she mentioned, I'm a farm business management specialist and team leader with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Southwest New York Dairy Livestock and Field Crops program. We're a partnership between Cornell University and the 5 CCE associations of Erie, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Allegheny, and Steuben counties. If you have any questions about the business logistics of this topic following this webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to me with my number and my email here. Even if you're not in our region, I can easily connect you to the person out your way. And then again, just acknowledging that this wouldn't be possible without the funding from the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. So we're really grateful for that. So if you've ever been to any of my webinars or presentations, you'll probably roll your eyes a little bit at this, but I always really encourage people to think about their why bother before you're making a business decision, expansion plan, diversification, basically any business altering decision on your farm. So entering into a value-added processing enterprise is going to be no different. So it's definitely a risky venture. It's not something that you have to do, and it's not going to be the best fit for everybody. It's also going to require a lot of work, and there's going to be struggles and obstacles along the way. So I encourage everybody to consider their why bother upfront to kind of help you along that path and help guide you when it comes to making these business planning decisions. So I'd encourage everybody to pause the video for just a minute, take a moment to reflect on your own what your why bother might be for your farm. So jot down some ideas for why you're even here watching this recording, or why you're considering some type of value-added venture for your farm. So basically asking yourself, why bother diversifying my dairy? So go ahead and hit pause and then hit play again once you've gotten that jotted down. Okay, so some examples of why bothers that I have heard from farms that I've worked with in the past. The idea that you can control your milk price, right? So milk pricing is commodity priced. So you're producing a product, buying inputs that you have very little control of the price over, and selling it, and you have very little control over the price that you're selling it for. When you switch out of a commodity milk market into a direct to consumer market or value-added market, potentially, you do get that opportunity to somewhat control your price. So if I have a roadside vegetable stand and I grow peppers, I can decide if I want to sell my peppers for $1 each or $2 each. There's going to be implications, right? Do I reduce the number of pepper sales that I have? Or is my price too low that I'm not earning a profit at all? But it's up to me to go out front to my vegetable stand and change that sign every day. If you are able to sell your dairy products direct to consumer, you have this same level of control within reason And that can help with the financial side of the farm and help with the uncertainty of the commodity milk market. Another reason that I often hear is that there are potentially higher profit margins with value-added dairy production. If we think about the processing chain as a continuum, if you're selling your product directly to a commodity market, there's not low, but you're not doing as much marketing as you might be if you were processing it further and getting it closer to that consumer. So if we go back to my peppers on a roadside stand example, if I'm taking my peppers to a produce auction, my interaction is really low. The time and effort that I have to spend marketing that product is lower than if I were selling it at a roadside stand. And that's even lower versus me taking it to a farmer's market and selling it there and being there all day talking to folks. And then that level of work and commitment is even lower than if I took those peppers and turned them into a salsa. So we can take our raw product and process it or market it along a continuum. The higher work effort that we have to put in, the more risk that comes with it, but then there's also potential of higher profit margins. So we're controlling that processing chain, we're getting it closer to the consumer, we're able to reap the profit margin that other processors, for example, might have taken if we stopped at a wholesale point. Value-added production also increases the product's value. So milk is milk, fluid milk is fluid milk. If we turn that fluid milk into cheese, it's got a higher value. If we turn that into ice cream, yogurt, any type of value-added production, it's going to have a higher value. Similarly, even with fluid milk, if we're selling fluid milk by the hundredweight off of a trucker to a cooperative versus bottling that milk and selling it ourselves, we're going to increase the value of that product by maintaining the processing on our own. There also is opportunities to reduce market risk when it comes to value-added processing or farm diversification. So this is where putting all of your eggs in one basket is a very good example. If you are a commodity or a commercial milk producer, you're selling your fluid milk through a cooperative or direct contract, you are relying on that as your sole source of income. If you diversify your farm and add some type of value-added processing, increase the products that you're producing or selling, diversify your revenue streams, for example, you're managing your market risk by putting your eggs in multiple baskets, by giving your farm different options for income and cash flow. Value-added production can also open new markets for you. So instead of only having a cooperative to sell your milk to, or a choice of 2 or 3 in your area, you now can take that product and sell it off of your farm, sell it at farmers markets, sell it to schools, to stores, to other wholesale avenues. So it can potentially open new markets for you. If you are able to get your foot in the door with a milk product, you might also be able to consider continuing to diversify your farm and offering a meat product, offering produce. So it's a way to get your foot in the door that makes you unique with value-added dairy production. I also have talked to people that just genuinely like ice cream, which is a completely valid reason. So it's really hard to enter into this venture if you don't have some type of passion or connection when it comes to the products that you're producing. And if you're able to produce a product that you enjoy, that you appreciate, that you're really proud of, gives you the opportunity to enjoy that product, but then also feed your neighbors, support your local community, reach your neighbors, build that village that we've lost touch with as our food systems become more streamlined. And I think that now is the perfect time that consumers are interested in buying more and more products directly from the farmer and within their own communities. Not exclusively, value-added dairy can be a really great option for sustainability for smaller dairy farms. So as smaller dairy farms may potentially lose buying power or access to larger cooperative milk markets, controlling your own processing is a way for you to stay in production without having to expand the farm. So it can be a way for smaller dairies to stay in business. Diversification also offers options for you to grow your dairy farm business. So because you're potentially having a higher profit margin, increasing your revenue streams, opening up new markets. If there is a place where your farm needs to grow, right? So you need to have more cash available for family living budgets, for example. So bringing the next generation on the farm, diversifying the farm to bring on additional parties that might be interested in the farm business, having another avenue or a larger margin, profit margin, will enable you to have enough cash off of that business to be able to support multiple family living budgets. So if you're in a spot where you might not be able to add cows, right? Like that's the first thing that we do when we want to bring on the next generation is, okay, we have to add some more cows now. But if you're in a situation where that's not a possibility, continuing to find ways to increase your profit margin, value-added production, or increase your cash flow, value-added production, these are all options for you to bring on that next generation or additional parties to your farm business. So now, briefly, I'm going to go over 7 considerations that I think about and encourage others to think about when it comes to on-farm processing. So the first one is management team support. This process is a really long process. It's a really hard process. And I think it's important to have your village, your community in place as you are considering this as an option for your farm. So to do this, you would think about the people around you, your family, partners on the farm, agribusinesses that you work with, vet, equipment suppliers, other farm suppliers, banker, your neighbors, and other key trusted advisors. So this might be your financial advisor, it might be your FarmNet representative, your Cooperative Extension representative, your farming mentor. How would this change, this addition to your farm, affect those relationships? How will they support you? How will you support them while you're busy adding this new venture to your farm business? And is everyone on board, right? So it's really hard to move forward with a big farm decision, a big farm change, if everybody's not on the same page. You need that circle of support, you need the cheerleading, you need the hard work, the creativity, the innovation that comes from multiple people being involved in a project. So if someone's not on board, I think that it's really hard to move forward without having a conversation with them, addressing any concerns that they might have, going through a business planning process to put things on paper and decide ahead of time how we're going to manage conflicts, what conflicts might already exist. As you go along with this process, you will or should consider adding third-party folks to your management team. So people that don't have skin in the game, right? So they're not selling you a product, they don't have ownership in the farm. They can come with a different perspective and help monitor any conversations or issues that need to happen, whether that's in a formal meeting space or an informal connection. So these business advisors could include CCE specialists like those of us on the call, New York FarmNet, your local small business development center, or a mentoring farmer or farmer in your community that is has the experience to serve as that moderator role. So the next consideration is the business life cycle. I think it's important to consider where your farm, think about your farm as a business, right? A lot of times we consider farming as our lifestyle, and I think that's why a lot of us farm, but we need to manage our farm as a business. Most businesses go through a cycle over time, and the time in each stage just depends on each business. It depends on changes, obstacles, access to resources, a whole bunch of different things. But before you consider moving forward, I think it's important to think about which stage your farm is at right now. So the first stage is startup or launching the farm. If you are a beginning farmer, this would be the period of time that you are purchasing land, purchasing assets, beginning your business plan. If you are a succeeding farmer, so you've taken the business over from a senior generation or a senior partner, this is the transition time from the previous management team to your management team. It's extremely difficult to add a complicated, diversified business venture like value-added dairy processing when you are in the launch phase or the startup phase. the launching phase, the startup phase is not the time to invest a ton of money into something that can go wrong really easily. So I think that it's important to recognize, where you are in the startup of your farm, and how value-added processing might fit in. The next two stages, growth and maturity, happen over time. So the growth stage is, you've gotten your foundation in place and now you are adding on cows, you're adding on different enterprises, you're thinking about value-added processing. And even at the maturity levels might be when we're looking forward to bringing the next generation on farm, and we might be thinking about value-added dairy processing as a way to do that, or on-farm processing. If you are considering exiting the farm business within the next few years, or you're looking towards that, it's important to consider how this venture and this investment will play out. If you are thinking about exiting the industry and you've got a lot of loans out on a value-added processing facility or equipment, that's going to slow you down when it comes to trying to exit. If you're exiting the business and transitioning it to the next generation, on the other hand, then this might be a way to continue to make sure that that farm is sustainable. So identify where you are in the business life cycle and understand that it's not always black and white or cut and dry, and determine how value-added processing would fit into that. The third thing to consider is your financial position and your borrowing capacity. Is your farm profitable right now? And if it's not profitable right now, very rarely will on-farm processing make it profitable right away. So if your farm isn't currently profitable, I think it's important to identify why, identify what management capacity needs to change, what access to assets need to change, resources. And you can do this through a variety of different financial analysis programs. Benchmarking is a great option through things like the Dairy Farm Business Summary. And if your farm's not profitable right now because of milk prices, right? Do you have experience with profitable farming in the past? Is it truly just a milk price issue, or is there something else in your way? Then consider what your farm's current debt load is and how much more you could sustain. This is where having a conversation with your banker, with your lender, is really going to be important, because some of them will say, yep, like you can add another $100,000 to your farm comfortably and we would be happy to support you. Other people are going to say, no way, like we're not lending you any more money. And it just depends on your farm's situation. It's going to be really hard to install, purchase, get started a value-added or on-farm processing setup without borrowing money in some way, shape, or form. That being said, if you do have borrowing capacity, go ahead and borrow that money. How does that change your farm's financial position? Does the addition of the value-added processing help overcome issues with cash flow or meeting and servicing those debts? Or are you putting yourself in a position where you won't be able to meet your financial obligations as they're due? So the fourth consideration is cash flow budgeting and profit potential. When we think about dairy farming, we're all used to the ups and downs of commodity milk pricing and what our milk check looks like, but we know that there's going to be 2 checks a month, right? Or however your payment system is set up. When you switch to direct marketing, there are going to be times where you get a lot of cash, hopefully, but then there's also going to be lulls where you're not having a lot of cash coming in. And it can be difficult to adjust your management styles to meet that change. Additionally, as you're starting up with value-added production, it's going to change the access to capital that you have. So even if you do borrow money, you're still going to be taking stuff out of your cash flow stream to help fund the project, to help with the transition period. And I think it's important to recognize how your farm might be able to handle that cash flow adjustment. The next thing is going to be budgeting. So I wouldn't be a good farm business management specialist if I didn't say you need a budget. I think it's important to guess, right? Like an educated guess of how this change will affect your farm business, and then add a sensitivity analysis to that. So in your head, you might have an idea of like how many customers you're going to have, what types of products you're going to have, what those prices might be. But then can you make that work if prices are low or if your sales are low? And then alternatively, what does it look like if it's an overwhelming success? Are you going to be able to meet demand, for example? The next question is, with your current business plan, your current budget, how long does it take for you to turn a profit off of your investment? And depending on what the answer is it something that your farm can sustain over time? Speaking of profit, does the profit that you're anticipating compensate you for your value of owner labor and management? So as farmers, we tend to discount the value of our labor. We tend to consider breaking even as our cash costs are covered, not considering depreciation on our machinery, depreciation on our land, and our own time, right? So very rarely are we writing ourselves our own paycheck. I've spoken with farms before who, when I bring up like, hey, are you making a profit, right? Or let's run the numbers. It doesn't look like you're turning a profit right now. Profit's almost a dirty word, right? Like it's not a good thing to talk about. And I would encourage the agricultural community as a whole to not think about profit as something bad. Profit is how you buy groceries for your family. Profit is how you pay yourself for all of your knowledge and labor that goes into the farm. Value-added processing requires a lot of time, requires a lot of management, and it's going to require a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from you as you're getting it started going. You need to be able to set up a system that you're going to be able to pay yourself back to appropriately compensate you for the value of your labor and management during the initial startup time and moving forward. So number 5 is being able to calculate your cost of production. I think that this is important to calculate your cost of production where you are right now, and then what it might look like with a value-added or on-farm processing facility included. So cost of production looks at how much money it costs you to make a thing, right? So if you're a dairy farmer, your thing is 100 weight of milk. How much money does it cost for you to make that milk? If you haven't done this before, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your farm business management specialist, because once you have that number in mind, it makes it easy to say, oh, look, my feed bill just went up by 10%. So my cost of production just went up by this much, and milk prices just decreased. So here's how much money I'm losing, right? Or my profit margin just narrowed. In order to do this, it's important to identify which financial records you currently have and which ones you still need. And this is where working with a farm business management specialist, they'll help you set up a record keeping system that makes sense. Once you've kind of calculated what your current cost of production is, you can then budget for what your future cost of production might be. You will be able to access resources to say, okay, here's what initial startup costs might be, here's what supplies might be, and then kind of budget, guess, estimate what your break-even price is. If you get to a break-even price of $45 for a pint of milk, right, because of your setup or what you're anticipating your investment might be, then that might be a wake-up call to say like, whoa, it's going to take me a really long time to break even, or a very specific market to break even. If you have some type of foundational cost of production and you can get it to a place where you are breaking even, where you are making a profit, if you have surprise costs that come along throughout the process, you're going to be able to identify like, okay, that just increased my price by 50 cents a gallon. How am I going to manage that? The next consideration is opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is a little bit of an abstract concept. This might be another eye roll moment, but it's really important. We don't have to farm, right? There's lots of people, 99% of the country doesn't farm. If we weren't farming, if we spent the same amount of time and effort on a different business venture, we might either be a lot happier or a lot sadder. So if we take the emotions out of it and think about the value of our time, if we did something else with our time, how much more money could we make, right? What would that look like? If we did something else with our borrowing capacity, that we might lean on in order to install or start out with value-added processing, what else could we do? So for example, if you're looking at value-added processing as a way to diversify your farm, and you know you're going to have to borrow $500,000 to get your ideal setup going, is there something else that you could invest that $500,000 in? Could you buy a combine? Could you purchase some beef cows? Could you put in a produce stand? Are there other options on your farm that might make sense to do instead of going the value-added route? And the answer is probably going to be, yeah, there are, but this is what I want to do. And I think that that's okay, but it still is a really good thought process to ask yourself, like, what else could I do with my time? What else could I do with my money? Are there other places on the farm that I could be investing this time and money that value-added processing is going to take that would help reap some additional benefits elsewhere? The other thing to consider too is that because of the time and effort and management pros that it's going to take to get this started and to manage in the future, are there parts of your business that are going to suffer because you're spending more time on this side of things? And the answer is going to be yes, right? Because we're human. We have the same 24 hours in a day. And ideally, we want to spend a little bit of that time sleeping. But how are we going to manage potential quality issues and other parts of our farm if we're spending more time and money on this new venture? And that's kind of what I would consider thinking about when it comes to opportunity costs. And then finally, I think that, and this is the most important one from my very humble perspective, is well-being. So does this project create a better or worse quality of life for you and your family? Is it better quality of life because you are able to have a little bit more steady of a milk price, for example? This is something that you're really passionate about. This is a way to bring a spouse home from an off-farm job. Or does this potentially make your quality of life worse because you're going to be really busy with the processing side of things, because it's going to tie up cash that you might need for a college fund or for braces? Is there a way that this is going to negatively affect your family that might be detrimental and irreversible? And then on the flip side, like, is this the perfect fit for your family and going to help get you to where your family goals are, along with your farm business goals? Another consideration is stress. So any new business venture, farming in general, is just stupid stressful on its own, right? But then anytime we're adding a new business venture, that's like a whole new pot of stress. If you don't have adequate stress management strategies or tactics in place that you feel comfortable using and practice using daily, how are you going to manage when things go wrong, right? Or hopefully when things go really, really well, and now you've got to adjust and keep up with demand. If you are already stressed out and don't have a great avenue for managing that stress, adding a whole new bucket of stress is not going to do you any favors. And then again, as I mentioned before, go back to your why bother, right? How does value-added dairy processing, on-farm processing, help you reach your farm's overall goals, help your family reach your family's overall goals, and help you reach your own individual goals? Okay, so those are my seven. Let me go ahead and stop this. Those are my 7 business considerations. As I mentioned before, I'm happy to help walk you through any of that, help you walk through a business plan, creating a budget, or connect you with the person in your region. And you'll find that with Anika's presentation, business comes into play with all of it. So try not to say, oh, I don't want to worry about the numbers, because the numbers are where the magic happens. So with that being said, Anika, I'm going to transfer it over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. So those were all some really, really great points, and we're going to borrow some of those concepts and the information that I have to share. But as Margaret mentioned, I'm a member of the Cornell Dairy Foods Extension Program, and today we're going to be talking a little bit more detail about what it actually takes to run a dairy processing facility, because you might have an idea in your mind, if you're interested in dairy processing, of becoming an artisan cheesemaker, but what does that actually look like? What are the things you actually need to consider in real life in terms of operating a functioning dairy processing facility? So that being said, just a quick intro to what the Dairy Foods Extension team has to offer. The Dairy Foods Extension team is a member of the Cornell University Food Science Department, and there's actually a certificate program within our program. So we have some core courses that folks who are interested in processing are able to take. So things like dairy science and sanitation, which is a great starter course, some food safety courses, which you'll find out later in my program that that's likely going to be required for you if you are going to pursue a dairy processing venture. Courses on pasteurization, and then specialized courses in different types of dairy products. So science of cheese, yogurt, fluid milk, ice cream, and frozen desserts, and then membrane filtration, evaporation, and drying. And then we also have advanced versions of those courses, along with some other courses that help you really develop yourself as a dairy processing person. Other resources that we have to offer before I jump into the meat and potatoes of this conversation is we actually have a functioning pilot plant on Cornell's campus in Ithaca. So we have the Food Processing and Development Laboratory, which we call the FPDL. And it's a great resource if you're interested in making a novel type of product. They offer consultation and startup services. And it's a great on-campus resource if you're interested in dipping your toe into dairy processing. So let's go back to the conversation that Caitlin was sharing earlier. So what are the motivations for pursuing a value-added venture? I generally find that they fall into one of three categories. So it could be a response to current market conditions. So, you know, the milk price is low and we need to differentiate or vertically integrate our business, or some form of cooperative strain. So if you're shipping your milk to a cooperative and you're not happy with that situation, you might be thinking to yourself, what else can I do? And that's where value added typically gets brought up in that conversation. There's also this concept of a next generation coming home, or even bringing a spouse home to the business from an off-farm job or something like that, but essentially making more room for people to integrate into the business. Someone might think to themselves, well, we can vertically integrate and start a dairy processing venture. And then there's also the concept of passion or desire. So this idea that someone's very passionate and says, you know, I'm really passionate about ice cream, and I know I can make a good product. I've tried several stovetop recipes and it turns out great. All my friends love it. Likewise for any other type of dairy product. So those first two, those current market conditions and next generation, are typically driven out of some form of need, whereas the passion desire one is more a want thing versus a need thing. And sometimes they can be a combination of those things, but that's generally where I see motivations for people pursuing value-added dairy processing. And none of them are negative things. They're all good reasons to evaluate, but I think it's important, as Caitlin brought up the whole well-being and stress management point before she handed it over to me. It's good to understand why your motivations for doing what you're doing, and that also can help drive your business plan and what you want the future to look like. I like to pose this question to audiences when I talk about dairy processing and having an on-farm processing facility. Should the dairy farmer be the dairy processor? And usually during a live session, I'd ask you to type in. And I usually get a smattering of answers. Yes, definitely, maybe, no. And my comment here is maybe and maybe not. And there's a reason that I say that. I think that people can be a really good dairy processor and dairy farmer. But also, if you don't have the right skill set or desire, it might not be a good fit for you. And it's important to go into that with your eyes open. So some skills for success that I talk about related to starting dairy processing ventures is, do you have the processing knowledge? Meaning, you know, just because you're a dairy farmer and you understand cows and you understand how to make milk, those are great. And those are definitely important things. But when you start dairy processing, it's an entirely different can of worms. And you always have to operate those two as different types of businesses, because they are. So the processing knowledge is going to be really critical if you want to pursue this. There's also the second bullet here, understanding regulatory and food safety requirements. This is becoming a more pronounced need as we move forward, and I would anticipate that the importance of understanding those requirements will become of increasing importance as time goes on, because there is a lot of work that goes into making sure that your facility has the necessary food safety requirements and documentation and programs implemented in your dairy processing business. And more times than not, it can become a good chunk of a full-time job. The marketing piece, this one is super, super important. And I'll talk about this in more detail, but historically and in recent history, most dairy farmers haven't had to do a whole lot of marketing because they're sending their milk to a cooperative, and the purpose of that cooperative is that they do the marketing for you. And so as an industry, we've removed ourselves a little bit from the consumer in the sense that there's usually a middleman in between. So when you start getting into a dairy processing venture, you need to think to yourself, am I prepared to take on that behemoth marketing task? Because without marketing your product, you're not going to be able to sell much product, and that obviously impacts your bottom line and whether or not this business is feasible. And then this last bullet is more or less wrapped into the other three. So time is our most precious commodity, and all of these other tasks take time, much less the actual manufacturing of the product itself. So it's definitely a time-consuming venture. And my point in bringing that up is more or less to say that you need someone who's dedicated to it. You know, if you're planning on milking cows in the morning and then processing, that might be really, really difficult to achieve because there's only so many hours in a day. And if you're one individual, then you only have 24 hours. And that's not even counting sleep. So definitely an important thing to think about. Okay, new plant production and startup. So let's say that you're pursuing this line of thought and you're thinking, how do I get started down this path? One of the first things that I like to bring up with people when they call and say I'm interested in dairy processing is, okay, what are you thinking? You know, what products would you like to make? And then, have you thought about marketing at all? So those are two very, very broad questions. Another question is, do you have a business plan? And again, having some sort of blueprint or vision is going to be really important and keep things realistic. And also when things get crazy, you can always refer back to that as sort of a compass, if you will. So it's not that you have to follow the plan exactly, but it is a very important tool in the toolbox. And then once you decide on a product and how you're thinking about marketing that, is it going to be a wholesale product or retail product? What are we talking about here? We need to think about how we're actually going to make it. So what are the equipment needs? What does the cost of that look like? And some people will call and they'll say, hey, I really want to make cheese. How do I do that? And that's where the processing knowledge comes in. And essentially, you would need to build your processing knowledge. And there's definitely resources for that, but that's going to take time. It's going to take a little bit of investment. And that's something you want to get right because equipment tends to cost a significant amount of money. One thing that I like to ask that I think is important is thinking outside the box a little bit. So can the product that you're describing be made at an existing plant? So the concept here is that, it's going to be expensive to have a licensed dairy processing facility because you'll have the structure, you'll have the equipment, you're going to have the labor, and you're also going to have to figure out, can I sell this product? What that marketing and sales piece is going to be important. So the idea behind this question of can the product be made at an existing facility, let's say there's a small or medium-sized dairy plant, relatively local or at a regional level to you. Could you essentially pay them to co-manufacture that product for you? And that way you're not putting a ton of capital investment in, but you're able to test out your marketing and sales tactics and make sure that you can actually gain some customers before making a capital investment in your own dairy processing facility, for example. Now, a lot of times that co-manufacturing can be a little bit more expensive, But that's going to be a decision you'll have to make. What's the opportunity cost of that? So how much would it have cost you to build your own facility and purchase your own equipment? How do those numbers play out based on the price? So I always like to bring that up as a concept, because I would hate for someone to invest a lot of money into a processing facility and equipment, and then find that the marketing is more than they bargained for. So definitely seek help, gather information. My team is able to talk to folks about the different types of equipment they would need and things like that. So definitely a good place to start in thinking conceptually about these questions before jumping into it feet first. The other main thing I like to tell people is contact your regulatory agency sooner rather than later. So in the case of dairy processing, New York State has the Department of Agriculture and Markets, Division of Milk Control and Dairy Services. They're based out of Albany, and then they have regional specialists that have different pieces of New York State. So you can call either this 1-800 number or this 518 number as a good point of contact, and they'll be able to point you to the appropriate person for your region, or the appropriate person to answer the specific question you have. But essentially what they're going to want is some sort of general plan from you to start the conversation. So if you're going to make a value-added product, you're doing more than building just a processing room. You're making food for public consumption. And the Division of Milk Control and Dairy Services is concerned with the public health and how you're designing your facility, but also is that product safe? And then if you have this general plan, they can hear that, and the plan helps guide the licensing process that you would need to pursue. And we'll talk about that in more detail as well. So when I say a general plan, I'm talking about what products and what varieties of products. So let's say you say, I want to make yogurt. Okay, well, what type of yogurt? Are you wanting to do yogurt with local fruit? Because we need to think about the food safety of that local fruit too, and how you're dealing with that. Are you going to make a drinkable yogurt? That would impact the type of equipment you may need. So product and specific varieties. What volumes are we talking about here in terms of milk volume? What container types? So are you going to do, retail, wholesale? What does that look like? And they'll also eventually be curious about the labels, because they'll need to approve those before you can actually sell that product. So think about ingredients, how the product will need to be stored and how it will be distributed. And then, of course, facility construction and layout. So building materials. I'll talk in more detail about what some of the basic requirements are there. The lighting, proximities. So where are things in relation to each other? That includes both inside the facility and how the equipment would be spaced out, but also where is the actual processing facility located in relation to the barn, for example, because there's obviously some food safety considerations on that end of things. How would you be receiving the raw milk into the processing facility? How would you be storing it, processing it? And then how would you be making sure that the raw product stays on what we call the raw side, and the pasteurized product, there's no cross-contamination there, because that would be a food safety concern. Think about utilities. So we're going to need some heat and cooling and electricity and all those things. So what does the utility situation look like? Would you have a boiler? Would you have a space where you'd be able to run lab tests, toilet facilities, and then septic and waste areas? So all of these would be folded into a general plan that Ag and Markets would like to see. Now on the right-hand side here, I have this map is always changing, so I would definitely recommend calling the Albany office, and you can definitely get referred to the right person. But this is just an example of how the state is broken up in terms of regions. So there's an area supervisor in each region, and you would be able to find your area supervisor and speak with them about the fact that you'd be interested in dairy processing. I know that sometimes they're saying, well, I don't want to get bogged down with regulatory stress right away. I'll kick the can down the road. That's not always a good thing to do in this case, because you want to make sure that if you're going to break ground and start building a facility, that that facility is done correctly, because ultimately these folks need to approve your dairy processing facility as a licensed facility if you want to sell anything out of it. So, you know, if you pour concrete and don't plan the drains in the right spot, they're going to say rip it up. So I always recommend having a collaborative relationship with New York State Ag and Markets. They really do have a great team there in Albany, and, you know, do the planning process right, because ultimately it's going to save you time, money, and effort to collaborate with them on that whole process. So essentially that process would look like they would review that general plan and provide feedback to you. They'd review the regulations and the required permits based on what you would be doing at your facility. They would need to look at all of the equipment you'd like to purchase, and they would have to review it and approve it. Let's say something's not quite right. They have to be careful that they don't switch from a regulatory to a consulting role. So they can't provide specific recommendations on exactly what equipment you need to buy, because that would be consulting. But they can certainly tell you, you know, why a product wouldn't be approved, for example. They would conduct site visits. So during the building, they can look at the equipment, and they'd also evaluate the property just for any big picture concerns. Again, they would need to review the label for compliance before you would be able to sell your product. And ultimately, you'd have a long-term relationship with the Division of Milk Control. So they would do an inspection every 90 days, and then there's monthly testing of the dairy products. So it's a cycle of inspection testing, and that will be the relationship moving forward. So it's definitely better to collaborate with them early on in the process, because it makes the rest of the business ventures life cycle much more amenable. So generally speaking, the specific permits that you would need could be any of these on the list. So you may need a milk dealer's license. If you're going to be having a dairy processing facility, you're going to definitely need a Part 2 permit. So this is what would give the plant licensing in order to process the dairy products. And this is what the plant would be inspected as. So it'd be under this Part 2 permit. We also have a processing plant superintendent, so we call that PPS. So the idea behind this is that at every facility, there needs to be someone in charge of food safety, and someone who is dedicated to making sure that you would be meeting the requirements of the state. So each facility needs to have one PPS on file, and that's part of the licensing process. If you're going to get into ice cream or frozen desserts, and you'd be selling them either wholesale, or if you're making the product from scratch, so you're making your own ice cream base or frozen dessert base, you would need a wholesale frozen dessert license. And then you may also need a milk receiver's license, depending on your scenario. So the state would definitely be able to tell you which licensing requirement you would fall under and what you would need to do to accomplish that. So the whole purpose of these licenses and the Division of Milk Control is this overarching theme of food safety. And ultimately, they're concerned with public health. So at the end of the day, this is what all of this is coming back to. So just a really quick, we're not going to get into a hardcore science class here, but there is pathogenic bacteria associated with raw milk. We know that there is bacteria in raw milk. And in a lot of cases, it can come from the cow itself, or it can come from the environment. So historically, things we worried about were things like Mycobacterium species, which causes tuberculosis, Brucella abortus, so brucellosis, Salmonella, Streptococcus, Corneobacterium, which would cause diphtheria, and then Coxiella burnetii. Nowadays, a lot of these are on the back burner, and the pathogens we're most concerned about include Listeria monocytogenes. This is definitely the big one, and the one that the dairy industry is pretty scared of, because number one, it's highly pathogenic. About 20% of the people infected with Listeria monocytogenes who get listeriosis actually die. So it's a scary one, and it also doesn't mind refrigeration or even frozen temperatures. So freezing doesn't kill it. And as a dairy industry, in an industry where we like to keep our product cold, Listeria isn't particularly affected by that. So that's one of the main concerns we have in the dairy industry. Salmonella is still on there. Campylobacter jejuni is actually the most common pathogen in fluid raw milk outbreaks, and this can lead to GI illness or Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is actually a progressive paralysis of the body, which is sometimes reversible and sometimes not. Yersinia and E. coli are also on there. So this is kind of the slide that typically scares people, but also it's going back to that public health comment. This is where all of this is coming from. So historically, this Coxiella burnettii is the most heat-resistant pathogen. So later when we talk about pasteurization, the way the pasteurization time and temperatures were determined is actually by how heat-resistant the most heat-resistant pathogen is. So this one can survive in the most extreme temperatures. So that's what we base our pasteurization time and temperatures on, so that we can make sure we're eliminating those pathogens. So when we think about a new plant, how do we address this? What do we do about these terrifying pathogens? Because no one's going to get into the business of food processing to get someone sick, or much less harm them seriously. So things we need to think about would be the pathogens associated with raw milk. So what do we need to control? And I just went through that. And then what pathogens are associated with the environment. So some of those that I mentioned on the previous slide can just live in the environment. So Listeria monocytogenes is a great example of that. You could have that on the bottom of your shoes and you can track it all over a facility. So we consider that an environmental pathogen, and our goal there is eliminating it or limiting it in the environment, and then also making sure it doesn't get from the environment to the product. So managing the risk in two different ways there. We also have pathogens associated with employees. So there's a lot of food safety issues, associated with employees. So hand washing being an important piece of the puzzle there, and following good manufacturing practices, which I'll touch on later. But also, you don't want people, I think most people have the most familiarity with this when they go out to eat. In restaurants, you don't want the cook staff or the wait staff sneezing on your food, right? It's a very similar concept. It looks a little bit different in a processing environment, but the same concept, where we don't want the employees at a dairy plant to be the vector for contamination. And then this concept of recontamination of a pasteurized product. So we want to make sure, we know we're dealing with raw milk, which has the potential of containing these pathogens in it. So how do we make sure that we stop that process? One way is definitely pasteurization. And then how do we make sure that it doesn't become recontaminated after pasteurization? So this is where important employee and environmental factors come into play. Chemical hazards are also another one. So because we want to keep food safe, cleaning is going to be an important piece of the puzzle, but we also don't want to be inadvertently filling milk bottles with sanitizer, which has happened, and there's been recalls for it because the tank wasn't totally emptied or things like that. So definitely programs that we need to keep in mind for that. Also, something that's become more and more important as time goes on is the concern about allergens. So especially in operations where you would have not just milk as an allergen, but let's say you're making ice cream and you have peanuts or tree nuts or soy in your facility, or wheat allergen in your facility. You need to make sure that you have a way to prevent that cross contact between the allergens, so that someone doesn't have an allergic reaction to a product that should be safe. And then we also have the physical hazards. So things like if you're going to fill milk in glass bottles, how do you make sure that when a glass bottle breaks, which it will, how do you make sure that that glass doesn't end up in the bottles adjacent to it? And likewise with metal. So in a dairy processing environment, you're going to have a lot of metal equipment. So how do you make sure you don't have metal shavings or, metal pieces that end up in your final product. So those are all, this is a very broad view of a lot of things that we look at when we talk about food safety. And the reason I bring them up is because programs that are required to address concerns like this take a tremendous amount of time. You need background knowledge, and it's going to be a time suck for people. But it's important for public health. It's important for your business to actually remain operational. It keeps the doors open to have these requirements taken care of. Additional questions to ask yourself, is your product being made from raw milk? So if it's a raw milk cheese, there's different considerations there. If you are interested in a raw milk product, I will defer you to our website where you can ask more specific questions about that. But also for pasteurized products, you could be beginning in pasteurized milk in some cases, but most of the time you're going to be pasteurizing that yourself. How will processing influence food safety? So pasteurization certainly helps food safety, but also limiting your cross-contamination potential. So any pathogens from the environment getting into your product after pasteurization. And then what food properties will influence food safety? It depends on the product. So things that we look at are, water activity. So the available moisture in a product. Generally speaking, the more available moisture you have, the more pathogens like that environment as a food source. What's the pH of it? If it's more acidic, it might limit the amount of bacteria that can grow in that. So products like yogurt and some types of cheeses can be a good example of that. On the flip side, if it's a more neutral pH, so some mild cheeses have a more neutral pH and more pathogens can thrive in that environment. So that's important. Competitive microflora, so cultures. For cultured products, you have living bacteria in there, and often they can help outcompete bacteria that would be undesirable in the product. And then natural or added inhibitors, so things like salt, things like that will help inhibit pathogen growth. And then other types of ingredients that could impact that. So all questions to ask yourself when you're preparing your general plan and thinking conceptually. And then again, all this to say that there's some serious consequences to foodborne outbreaks. And unfortunately, we've seen many businesses have to shut their doors as a result of a foodborne outbreak, which leads to the closure of a business. So this Marler Clark picture right here, they're a law firm that specifically specialized in prosecuting food safety issues, and they've done a lot of big ones. So things to think about, product recalls, definitely a possibility, could lead to a loss of consumer consequences, definitely regulatory attention, perhaps media attention. It's expensive and again, can lead to your doors closing. So this is why we bring all this stuff up. So jumping back to this regulatory perspective. So within New York State, we have several different documents that I would recommend reading or at least skimming through. It's not going to enthrall you because it can be rather technical, but it is good if you want to get into dairy processing to understand what these documents contain so that at minimum you can go look things up. So this is the Part 2 regulation for New York State. So it covers the requirements for the production, processing, and distribution of milk and milk products. We also have Part 7, which covers the pasteurization of cheese and cheese curds. So there's a lot of cheese information in here. It also talks about any raw milk cheese requirements. And then there's Part 17, which is labeling requirements and definitions and what the standards of identity of milk, milk products, and frozen desserts are. So when I say standards of identity, I'm referring to the product characteristics that allow you to call something milk or yogurt, for example, because you have to meet certain technical criteria to have that on the label. And that's basically the goal there is to make sure consumers understand when they buy something that says yogurt on it, it is truly, there's a standard for yogurt. Now on the federal side, we have several potentially important documents. So there we have the Grade A Pasteurized Milk Ordinance. So the states have adopted the Grade A Pasteurized Milk Ordinance And this essentially makes sure each state is on the same playing field for grade A products like fluid milk, yogurt, etc. So this is a great resource. It's online. So if you Google grade A pasteurized milk ordinance, FDA, you should be able to find a PDF copy of this. It has a lot of really good information in there, and that's where it will cover the requirements for pasteurization, for cooling. I like to say it's the national standard for milk from cow to cup. So it's definitely important. If you want to ship milk across state lines, you need to make sure that you understand what the PMO requirements are. Then we have the FDA food code. Depending on the type of operation you have, if you had a retail establishment tied to it, you may be also subject to the FDA food code. And then last, we have the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21. And this is where we'll find our requirements for good manufacturing practices and any labeling, additives, etc. And I'll talk about the good manufacturing practices in a bit here. So there's your required reading on the regulatory side. So when we think about that, it's always good to make sure you have an understanding of it. You don't need to memorize that stuff, but it's good to look at it to understand what the playing field is. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about new plant plans in terms of the premises, equipment, and what the process is. So when we think about premises, there's several things. So number one, we need to have a suitable building. This is at minimum, we need to have water, hot and cold. It needs to be potable water. We need to have some form of utilities, and then a waste disposal plan. So think about drains and where the building is located and things like that. We also have the layout of the building to consider. So we need to have separate rooms for different purposes, and I'll talk about that more shortly. Also, ventilation is important. A lot of times we'll talk to folks who have an on-farm processing facility, and they'll say, I'm having these mold issues or yeast or mold issues with my product. It's causing my product to spoil earlier than it should. And sometimes it's due to ventilation and the fact that, yeast and mold spores will travel in an airborne manner. So if you have poor ventilation, especially if you're near a cow barn or things like that, you have lots of spores flying around and they can get into that product. So ventilation is an important piece of the puzzle. Lighting needs to be sufficient. So one of the things that, if a plant is having a food safety issue or we're evaluating a plant for its hygiene or good practices, we always have a flashlight with us to see better. It makes it a lot easier as a plant operator if you have really good lighting, because then you'll be able to see where the problem areas are a lot easier. You need to have a toilet and hand washing facility associated with your food facility. So you're going to want that to be part of the building. You need to have some form of bathroom. And then you also can't have the bathroom immediately open into the processing area. There needs to be some sort of break. And then also thinking about the processing equipment that's going to be on the premises. So in most cases, you'll need a legal pasteurizer. I'll talk about that shortly. You might need a filler or a packaging piece of equipment, depending on what you're making. Storage tanks, handling equipment for packaging, a capper for milk bottles, any labeling equipment that you would need. And then you'll also need to think about how you'll be storing any records or auxiliary materials. So when we think about the premise and equipment, we need to think about other things as well. So I like to tell people that when you build a plant, you're not just building a processing room, or some people who have gotten really familiar with a product that they want to make in their kitchen, on their stovetop, they've been experimenting, they'll start to refer to their future plant as a kitchen. And it's very much not a kitchen. So even if you're going to be processing and selling 100 gallons of milk a week, you are subject to the same regulations as a very large dairy plant. So you need to get in the mindset of thinking this as a dairy processing facility. And that's not just a processing room, it's a dairy processing plant. So when you think of your dairy processing plant, you'll need to think in terms of, okay, I'm going to have an area where I'm doing processing and it's going to flow from raw to pasteurized as best I can. And then I'm also going to need a space for the other things that dairy processing entails. So I'm going to need a place to store my packaging and labeling materials. I'm going to need a bathroom. I'm going to need a place to receive my milk crates back in, or wash my glass bottles for my bottled milk that I'm selling, or all of those different things. Or I'm going to need an entry area where I can put on my dedicated plant shoes and my uniform for the facility, so I'm not tracking pathogens through my facility from my street clothes. There's all these things to think about. So I love to tell people, get in the mindset that you're building a dairy processing facility. It's not just a processing room. It's not a fancy kitchen where you'll be making a product. It's an entirely different animal. But in terms of thinking about these things, it is really important. So when you're designing your facility, think about packaging and labeling storage. Think about your finished product storage and your ingredient storage, and how you're going to handle that, and then finished product distribution, and how you'll load out, or what that looks like for you based on your business plan. When it comes specifically to packaging and labeling, think about making sure that it's food grade materials. So your suppliers will be able to tell you if they meet that criteria. And then for the labels themselves that you'll presumably be getting printed, the Albany office will need to review those to make sure that they have all the required information on them. As far as the finished product storage and handling goes, you're going to need some sort of temperature control at least. Depending on what the product is, it might be more important for humidity control, and then potentially light control. And then protection from damage and tampering in terms of how that product is stored. So you want to make sure that your product is stored. If it's stored in finished product, then generally speaking, it's in a decent position for not being damaged in the storage process. And then distribution, how are you doing that? What are your temperature control requirements? Again, how are you protecting that product? And then if you have product that leaves your facility and then comes back for whatever reason, you can't reprocess that. If it leaves the facility, then you can't do that. So when we think about layout of your plant, it's really important to keep food safety in mind here. So it's helpful to think of both the product flow and the personnel flow from going from low risk to high risk. You want to keep raw products with raw products, and then pasteurized with pasteurized. So in an ideal scenario, your product would flow from the raw side to the pasteurized side, and you wouldn't be doing a whole lot of zigzagging back and forth, because that increases your chance for post-processing contamination, which defeats the purpose of pasteurization. You want to keep, this is counterintuitive, but it's actually helpful to keep as dry of an environment as possible. And the reason for that is a lot of pathogens, including the one we're most scared of, which is Listeria monocytogenes. A lot of pathogens like a wet environment. They survive better in the environment when it's a little damp. And since we're dealing with a liquid, we use a wet cleaning method in order to make sure that our product remains safe. But if we keep the plant as dry as possible in between those cleanings, it actually limits our risk and helps our environment do better when it's dry. Product storage to eliminate contamination. So again, just protecting that product during storage, especially while it's still in your facility. And then limit access to essential personnel. So depending on what your operation is, you don't want just anyone being able to access your plant. You don't want it to become a highway of traffic. And we see this a lot with on-farm operations, because generally they're in very close proximity to the farm. And you might have dedicated employees who are working in the plant, but there might be someone who just has a quick question for you about cow number 551 in the cow barn, and they might want to pop their head in and talk to you. But you don't want that to be, you want that to be off limits, because we've seen contamination issues when people pop in and pop out of the dairy plant. So it really needs to be treated as its own separate entity. And then know what allergens you have and how to control cross contact. So the reason I bring this up multiple times is because allergens are the #1 cause of recalls across the food industry. So a lot of times that comes down to improper labeling on the product, but also it can come down to, peanuts weren't supposed to be in this type of ice cream and they accidentally were included. And then we have allergic reactions and we have a product recall. And even if there's not an allergic reaction, if they find that that's in there, you still have to do a recall. So knowing your allergen situation is going to be very important. And think beyond the processing room. So I brought this up already, but where are you storing all your things? It's kind of like, I always feel like in my house, I'm running out of storage, right? And it's going to be the same in a dairy processing plant. I'm not saying that you have to increase the square footage in a huge capacity, but you need to think about where those dedicated places are going to be. So packaging materials, your ingredients, your dry ingredients, any other liquid ingredients. If you have other refrigerated ingredients or frozen ingredients, where are all those going? And a lot of times, if those ingredients are raw, you're going to need a separate space, and you're not going to want to be storing them in your finished product cooler, for example. Or if you do, you need to have adequate separation so that you don't have to worry about cross-contamination. And any refrigerated or frozen inventory will obviously need its own dedicated space. So think about your flow of incoming materials and your outgoing materials. So if you're going to be having milk crates, for example, those have to come in and they have to come out. And when they come back in from wherever you originally sent them, you don't know where they've been. So you need to have some sort of either crate washer or dedicated storage space for those, so they're not dragging pathogens throughout your facility. Glass bottles, you'll need a bottle washer, and it's a requirement that the bottle washer have its own room associated with it. So again, just thinking about what are your products, because your equipment needs are going to be determined based on that. And then also your distribution. So the milk crates, for example, that impacts your facility design. Dedicated and accessible doors for incoming goods versus outgoing goods. So will you have 2 separate doors? Will it be the same one? I'll say that I don't think I've ever seen a perfectly designed facility, but there are ways to make life easier. So we're not necessarily shooting for perfection, but if you have the ability to plan appropriately, why would you not? Also really, really important to have adequate space for personnel changing area, shoes or lab coat or uniform, etc., whatever that may be. The shoes being a really big one here. You might want at least some form of desk space. This is something we don't see people budget a lot for in terms of space, but they always regret that. So things like this are always important. We've also seen people who will retrofit a facility to meet the requirements of Part 2 licensing, and then, which is a good problem to have, they end up doing a lot of volume and they grow out of it very, very quickly. So if you do have the opportunity to build your own facility, and maybe you start out building it smaller, but you make it so that it's going to be a really easy expansion process, if knock on wood, you become successful. That may be, even though it might be a few $1,000s more on the start end, it might actually be more advantageous, because typically when we see people retrofit facilities, when it's time to expand, it becomes 10 times more complicated. And they thought, man, I wish we could just start over and build a whole new facility. So again, there's really no ideal, but there's ways you can plan to make your life easier for the future. So going back to the Ag and Markets requirement, one of the things that will be required is a process narrative on Form DMC 1505. It details the scope of the project, including the start date, product type, the type of equipment to be installed, the flow of the product within the system, any unique instrumentation. Think about the process temperatures that you'll need to use, any flow rates, storage times, etc. So I bring this up now, having just talked about facility design and layout and thinking about what products you want to make, because this information will be required. There's also DMC 1505 Part 3, list of equipment. Include a list of equipment and apparatuses that will be installed with the sufficient documentation that covers what the design is like and what it's made out of. And make sure that the information is specific to the actual model of that equipment that you're buying. So one of the things that I like to tell people is that if you are looking at buying used equipment, that's fine, but oftentimes the state can look at it before you actually purchase it to evaluate it for whether or not it meets their standards. So I would absolutely recommend doing that, or at minimum, make the, make that sale dependent on approval by New York State Ag and Markets. And then you also need to highlight who's going to be installing it. So include a list of installers or fabricators or any outfit who's performing any sanitary welding of stainless steel. And they need to be registered with the department. So that's all online. And again, you can talk through this in more detail with Ag and Markets, but just giving you a high level overview of the type of information that will be required of you. As far as a processing specific important piece of information, a lot of times folks go, pasteurization will be required. So they'll go with a VAT pasteurizer because VAT pasteurizers are much more expensive than the other type of pasteurizer, which we call an HTST. And it's essentially a batch process. So it's going to be a little bit less efficient than a continuous process, but oftentimes it will do the job for the volume that you're at least beginning with. The temperature and time requirement for VAT pasteurization is 145 degrees for 30 minutes. So let's say that you get to minute 29 and you dip to 144 degrees Fahrenheit, you have to start that whole process back over again. So that 145 for 30 minutes is the absolute minimum requirement. If the fat content of the product is 10% or more, or the product contains added sweeteners, the temperature increases another 5 degrees to 150 degree requirement. So products like eggnog or ice cream mix, which are especially thick and dense and have added sugar in them, the requirement is 155 degrees for 30 minutes. And in all of these cases, there's actually a thermometer that measures the product temperature. There's also a thermometer that's there to measure the air temperature. And the whole goal of pasteurization, as it reads in the pasteurized milk ordinance, is to make sure that every particle of milk is heated to the minimum time and temperature. So for that reason, we actually also monitor the air temperature, the airspace temperature when we do VAT pasteurization. And the requirement for that is that the airspace is 5 degrees above the minimum product temperature for pasteurization. So for regular milk, we have 145 degrees for the product, it'd be 150 for the air. If you have a sweeter or higher fat content product, where the requirement is 150, it'd be 155. And for eggnog and ice cream mix, you'd go from 155 to 160 for the airspace. So all of those will be requirements. While we're on the topic of pasteurization, all of these pasteurizers need to be legal pasteurizers, and it's really important that the state approves these. There are certain design characteristics that are going to be critical here. So the design is really important. You can't just get a regular stainless steel vat and call it a VAT pasteurizer. So you'll need the accurate, you'll need the thermometers associated with it. You'll need to make sure that the agitator meets approval, the overall design, and then also the recording device associated with that VAT pasteurizer. Those are the components that go into making sure that VAT pasteurizer is actually a legal pasteurizer. So approved thermometers and recording charts, and then the Dairy Foods Extension team does offer training on pasteurization for those who are getting into dairy processing. Now, I told you the other type is HTST pasteurization. That stands for high temperature short time. And essentially an HTST is a plate heat exchanger. And it's a much more efficient way to pasteurize, but it's also much more expensive. And this is a picture of the pasteurizer at the Cornell University dairy plant. Rather than 145 degrees for 30 minutes, the temperature requirement goes to 161 degrees for 15 seconds. And again, if the fat content is 10% or more, it goes to 166 degrees. And then for eggnog and ice cream mix, it goes to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, there's training specific to this type of pasteurization at Cornell. So these are much more expensive units, but they're also much more efficient. So it's going to depend on what your business plan is on whether or not you'd go with a VAT pasteurizer or HTST. More often than not, for startups, we see VAT pasteurizers. Cooling is going to be really important for milk products. So we're talking 45 degrees or less. Containers must be filled when the milk is cold. Each refrigerated room is equipped with an indicating thermometer, and each storage tank needs to be outfitted with a thermometer. And any recirculated cooling water needs to be from a safe source and tested semi-annually. When we think about packaging in a dairy operation, all milk and milk products bottled and packaged at a plant where the final pasteurization is performed is a requirement. Capping is important. So there is a requirement that you don't hand cap the product. So you have to have some sort of machine that caps it. It can be a very simple machine, but that is a requirement. Any drip deflectors need to be installed so that you're not getting drippage in a gallon of milk, for example. So overhead shielding will be important. And again, Ag and Markets can cover this stuff with you. I already gave you my public service announcement on buying used equipment, but just make sure that that's approved before you buy it, or at least if the sale is contingent on approval. Approved dairy processing equipment it's not inexpensive. So it's going to be an expensive endeavor. So that's where, thinking of your business plan and what your budget is going to be very important. We always get the question, where can I look? There's lots of different places that you can find dairy processing equipment. A couple examples are Qualtech, Qualtech.ca, United Dairy Machinery Corporation, UDMC. Feldmeyer is another option. There's used equipment, so Shire, Olimer's Dairy and Fabrication, and many more. There is another caution here, so be really careful buying European equipment. I know that some people, they'll go abroad and they'll want to make gelato and they have the perfect all-in-one machine that can do it all, but their standards are not the same as ours. So make sure before you buy a product, again, go back to Ag and Markets and make sure it's approved. In this slide, this is just a hand sketch of a processing room. So here, we have a port for our raw milk, a vat pasteurizer, another vat, a table, a bottler, another table. We have our utilities room here, a hand sink, a 3-bay sink, and a shelf, and the door to get into the facility. So I like to pose the question, what's missing? And the goal of this is to get you thinking that this is a processing room. We don't have any storage. We don't have any incoming or outgoing mechanism for any of our ingredients or our finished product. We don't have an entryway area for employees. So if you get nothing out of this, make sure that you're thinking of your future dairy plant as a facility and not just a dairy processing room. So we've covered some requirements on what you would need in the facility of itself and what we would need for specific pieces of equipment. But what about marketing? So think about time. So who is doing the marketing? Because I've asked many folks who have started operations, successful value-added dairy processing operations, and we'll say, what do you wish you knew? And they'll say, I wish I knew how much time I would spend trying to sell my product. So go into that with your eyes open. Do you have the know-how and motivation to market the product? So ask yourself, do you want to interact with your customers? Because you might not want to, and have an honest conversation with yourself about that. Would they be retail customers or wholesale customers or both? Would you need to hire somebody else to do that? You know, what does that look like for your operation? And then logistics. Customers do have requirements now. They care about a lot of things. The main one being food safety, which is why I spent so much time talking to you about that so far. And then also think about the logistics of distribution. So sometimes it's really good to get your foot in the door with a business, but they might not have a high volume of orders from you originally. So you think to yourself, okay, well, I got my foot in the door. It is costing me a little more to go there than I'm making, but I need to get my foot in the door, but sometimes that can go on for a while. So just think about your cost of distribution, keep all that in mind, both when you're making your business plan and also during implementation, so you don't get caught in a position that you don't want to be in. So make sure that you think of that if you build it, they will come as a myth, and maybe you'll get lucky and people will flock to you, but generally we see people have to actually put a lot of effort into the marketing side of it, which is different than what they've had to do with dairy farming. So who or where is your market? Is it seasonal? What are your outlets? Who is doing the marketing? Again, with that time piece. We go back to the 4 P's of marketing. So product, price, place, and promotion are all different components here. Product is what exactly is the product and what need does it fill for consumers. The price. So chances are your product is going to be a little bit more of a premium product or a niche, but make sure that you think about where you are geographically. Are your customers going to be willing to pay that? What does that look like? Some of the advice I see here is that it's much easier to lower your prices than hike them after you start. So keep that in mind. Again, place, who are you? Where are your customers? Does it cost you a lot to transport your finished product to your customers, or are they right there? And then also, where is the product physically placed? So what store shelves is it on, if any? Promotion, how are you going to promote your product to the customers? So either directly to consumers or to other businesses. Again, don't underestimate the time it takes you to distribute your product to where it needs to go, and determine what volume you need to move through potential customers to make it worth the trip out there. This is a population density map based off of the 2020 New York State, or the census, and this is a map of New York State. So the darker areas here illustrate higher population density. So you'll see more or less around this I-90 corridor, we have the more dense populations. And then of course, when we get downstate and into New York City, that's where the highest population density is. And I bring this up just to make sure that people are thinking about who is your customer. And you know, how many of them are there, what's the demographic there look like, because again, you need to be able to market appropriately. So when you are ready to grow your business, let's say you want to get into grocery store chains like Whole Foods, Wegmans, Target, World's Best Cheese, Murray's is another cheese operation, and many more. You know, the list is endless here. But again, going back to the fact that customers have requirements, one of the questions that they very well may ask you is, have you had a third-party audit? And you might be thinking to yourself, what are they talking about? And then, okay, what do I do? Where do I go? And how do I pass this third-party audit? So an audit is going to be really important for marketing, especially to other businesses and retail operations. An audit is an independent examination of the system. And you need oh, I had an automatic jump here. Essentially, an auditor is going to come in and evaluate your facility to make sure that you are making safe and in some cases high quality products. So when we think about a third party audit, this is going to be someone who's from an outside auditing company hired to certify your facility for a customer. So a first party audit would be like an internal audit. So it'd be like me auditing my own dairy plant. A second party audit would be someone like an actual customer. So if you were selling to Wegmans, Wegmans might come in and do an audit for you. That'd be a second party audit. Or a state regulatory official may be considered a second party audit. But a third-party audit is a different auditing agency who's more independent, coming in and evaluating your facility and then giving you a rating and a report based on the food safety requirements. With these, there's usually a documentation requirement component of the audit, as well as a inspection of the actual facility itself. So you need a documented food safety program, standard operating procedures or work instructions, and then records proving that you followed your program. So when I said that this food safety piece takes a tremendous amount of time, that's important for both public health, but it's also really important for marketing and your ability to get your foot in the door with grocery chains. So that's something I would highly recommend planning for in your process. So if we go through a food safety audit and we meet their requirements, that's a great way to get your foot in the door with an audience to selling your food, particularly in a retail setting. So hopefully that will help you move volume. But at the end of the day, you need to be producing a product that consumers like, and that's also safe. So the two things that you need to think about in terms of curating your knowledge of dairy processing is making a product that tastes good. So getting your recipe right takes effort and knowledge. And even if you've been experimenting, it's a great thing to do, experimenting, but if you were in a facility, then the equipment's going to change, your process is going to have to be adjusted slightly. So that takes time and effort to get right. And then also making sure that when you're testing your product, don't just ask your close friends, they will lie to you to keep your feelings intact. So make sure that you have a good concept of reality in terms of, do consumers like my product? And then is it safe? So again, just that piece is obviously important for keeping your doors open. So recommendations in that vein, get training before you break ground. Oftentimes that training will also help build insight into what you would need in a facility that you may not have already thought of, or you might realize, wow, it's going to take me a lot of time to do this because I didn't realize I had to do X, Y, and Z to meet regulatory requirements. Test out your recipes at a processing facility before you build a plant, if that's a possibility. So you could do that at a regional plant that's close to you, if they'd be willing to do that, or you could always contact Cornell's Food Processing and Development Lab to see if you could utilize their space and equipment in order to do that. And then also understand the regulatory requirements at the state and federal level before entering the business. So we have a lot of information here on our website, dairyextension.foodscience.cornell.edu. Okay, other business considerations to think about are understand your cooperative's requirements. So again, oftentimes folks who are in the dairy business are operating through a cooperative, and you likely have a contract with them. So understand what their rules are on you starting your own dairy processing facility. In a lot of cases, you may actually need to buy the milk back because they've contracted your entire milk supply. So make sure that you take a look at your contract and call your cooperative, understand what those requirements are. Again, thinking about whether or not co-packing is an option for you as you start up your business and become familiar with your customers in your market. It may actually be a more cost-efficient decision for you in that kind of opening growth phase. And then building a plant, not just a processing room. So again, I've covered that in detail. If you get nothing else out of that, please remember that. And now I wanted to highlight some examples of roads to success or struggle. So in this scenario, it's titled, "Don't Put All of Your Eggs in One Basket." In this case, there was a processor who made a contract agreement with a large grocery chain, which is great. And they started making cheese like gangbusters and filled their aging cave to meet the demand and the anticipated demand. The chain highlighted the local artisan and made a large order to supply all their stores. But unfortunately, the cheese didn't sell so well, and the price point from the artisan was too high at the onset, which then, there's a markup at each step in that chain. And then large grocery chains are an outlet, but it's also not necessarily a way to get rich quick. So the orders ended up dwindling because the customer's product wasn't moving. And the cheesemaker ended up sitting on a large inventory that they couldn't move because there was no other outlet. So there wasn't enough of a balanced plan. All of the eggs were in one basket, and that ended up being a massive setback for this operation. In this case, we had a cheesemaker making cheese in a small plant, and they didn't really have any food safety plan in place yet. And the plant was attached to the same building as the barn. They started doing pieces of food safety to include testing their environment for listeria, which is a common preventive practice. They found listeria in the plant, but had no real plan to attack it, and they didn't have enough of a root cause analysis done on how to actually get rid of that listeria in the plant. They had a positive listeria finding for cheese that had made its way onto retail shelves, and the FDA ended up showing up to their facility. So the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA ultimately forced a recall and a closure of this facility, and the plant had never recovered from that. So again, what I was saying in the beginning just wasn't me being in academic world. These are things that we see happen in real life. But there's also examples of success stories. So there has been, this is a specific example, but this operation started with a small company making really a limited variety of really great cheese products. They did get a shot at a larger retailer, and they worked on preparing for a certified GMP audit. So that third-party audit, that's one of the types of a third-party audit that I was discussing. They passed this audit, and the grocery chain was like, okay, great, you passed your audit, you've met our requirements, we like your cheese, we'll start buying it. They started supplying the customer with a promise to get what we call SQF certified, which is a higher level of certification through that auditing agency. They prepared for that audit and passed it. So again, all these things are taking time for sure. They continued business with that retailer. They increased their sales and increased production. And now they're moved into a bigger facility. They've expanded their product variety, and they're still doing great. So there definitely is potential. It's just a matter of, again, going into it with your eyes open, making a good product that customers actually like, meeting the requirements of the retailers, and having a solid plan in place. So definitely make sure that you're thinking about the types of products you'd want to make, which would have a strong influence on your facility design. Think about cleaning chemicals, which would be an important food safety and budgetary item. And then some products may require special regulatory consideration. So if you have a question about a really unique product you want to make sure you reach out to Cornell, and they can help steer you in the right direction. But take away from this, key points: make sure that when you're thinking about this, you ask yourself, are you ready to run a completely different business than you would be running as just a dairy farmer? It's a totally different game. It's a different mindset. It's a different level of cleanliness and food safety requirements. And a lot of people think that they're going to be spending most of their time physically making this dairy product, when the reality is a lot of the time goes into the planning and the food safety and the cleaning and the sanitizing and the marketing and things like that. Marketing is really, really important. We see that time and time again with the successful folks. The marketing is very time consuming. Food safety is critical to keeping the doors open. And lastly, please feel free to reach out to our Dairy Foods Extension team with more questions. Here is the website one more time. If you scroll down on that homepage on the bottom right side, there's a Ask the Experts button. And if you click on that, you can submit the question, and then we're really good at making sure the right person gets their hand on whatever question you may have. So we would highly encourage you to do that. With that, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and hope you have a lot of food for thought.
All right, thanks, Anika.
Yeah.
And thank you again to Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center for funding this webinar and associated programs. If you like this webinar, and are thinking about expanding your own business to include value-added production, please consider signing up for one of our upcoming discussion groups to help you move through the business planning process, or think about going on our value-added tour to Eastern New York to check out successful businesses and our industry partners out there, and also to get ideas for your own business ventures. So thanks again to our speakers, both Caitlin and Anika, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you.